Hey guys, I'm Kai. I'm an 18-year-old artist from the UK. I'm currently working on a one-shot with Viz. I want to show you guys how to, do paneling for your mangas, or show you how I do it anyway, because I'm not formally trained or anything like that. I'm just doing it how I learned from other mangas and things like that. First of all, we're just gonna start mad basic, what panels are, and then we're just gonna go, up in skill level and things that you should learn. So essentially, first, the panel is just a square, or a line like this, or a line like this. Essentially, all it is just what you're putting the art inside of, and you use these for pacing. You use them for, mostly just pacing. Yeah. So I'm also going to go a bit into sort of what goes into the panels too, composition and things like that, because I don't think you can really talk about paneling without talking about these specific parts too, because usually when people say you have good paneling, they're just referring to the composition anyway, on the shots you're putting into your stuff, and how interesting they are. Less of just the squares, because to be honest, you can kind of make any panel border work depending on how you put it together. You can make this work. The most basic ones you can make work. The general idea is that if you do vary the panels too, you're going to be putting a lot more interesting stuff into your mangas. But it doesn't necessarily mean you have to do that. But you should. But what's more important is what's going inside of the panels, in my opinion. Even though most people say paneling matters more, but I don't think that's the case. Okay, so first, so the amount of squares that you're supposed to put on a page, I think that's probably the most common question, or at least, that's usually my first concern. Usually mangas do 1 to 7, I think. But for me personally, in 2025, I think 1 to 5 works better. And 5 is still, but, some mangas are going to go to 7, Hunter x Hunter, Dr. Stone, things like that. But for me, I prefer to keep it very concise and use as little panels as possible. This will let us give the panels room to breathe and also come up with the most interesting paneling that we can do. If you have 7 panels on a page, for example, you really have to squeeze them in, I feel like. It's like, it's a little tough. That might not even be 7 panels, but the idea is you want space to put in your panels and everything like that. What else people tend to look out for, or things that people teach, is that there's 2 and 3 sort of tiers for horizontal like squares. So usually 4 is like older manga, like Tezuka's mangas, or even some new mangas use them too, but it's a lot harder to create interesting things with this, because once you start adding stuff to it, it becomes more and more cluttered. So nowadays people just use the 3 of this, so like this, essentially. And this looks a lot better than, well, not a lot better than, but depending on the purpose you're using them for, and stuff like that. With people who don't like to read as much nowadays, I'd say, less panels, more interest, matters more than actual, those kind of panels. Additionally, if it's them sort of like a, like a fight scene or an important scene in general, I feel like there's this emphasis on, like, use tilted panels to emphasize like speed or something like that. But they can also be used for even basic scenes where people are just talking to make it more interesting. I feel like people associate them solely with just speed, which isn't the case a lot of the time, or shouldn't be the case, because if you look at any romance mangas or shoujos, they're used a lot, or sometimes they're used for pages, even if the most basic stuff is happening. I mean, shoujo mangas, like, an expression is like, or at least Rent a Girlfriend, which isn't shoujo. Romance, shonen romance mangas are like, they could put a tilt and it'll just show like a large expression, which I personally like. And since we're here, I just some mistakes, or like, I wouldn't say mistakes, but stuff that makes your work look more amateur if you don't know why or what you're doing, essentially. First for me is sort of symmetry. So symmetry is just basically when both sides look exactly the same. So when you're doing the panels, if you cut it down the middle, you draw through on this side, you also draw through on this side, like so. And this is actually really boring, especially for people who's reading, because at the end of the day, you want to make something that's exciting for readers to read, because that's the purpose of why you're making what you're making. So instead of doing this, things that you could do to make it more interesting if you're confused, a good thing is to choose a side. So let's say you chose this side, and on this side you'd put a panel. But you know, the middle is where you wouldn't put panel. So you choose one of these sides, you put the panel on this side, and then this one goes across like that. So this can help you create more interesting panels in general. So let's say I chose this side, I draw a panel like this, the other panel goes like this. It's very simple, and it's gonna, you know, help make your panels more interesting. Basically, just with panels, I'd say vary them as much as you can and make them as interesting as possible. Additionally, when you're doing this, what you know people tend to do too is line up pages like this. When in reality, I think a lot of mangas actually don't line up so cleanly. You look at your favorite mangas, Danadan, Rent a Girlfriend, Nizukoi, Peak. You notice they never quite line up like this. Instead, like a panel might be over here, like so. Another one might be over here, like that. So they never line up sort of in a straight line, because that would make it boring. One more time as an example, if I didn't explain it that well. A lot of beginners, they do this, and, well, not necessarily this, but like this. These panels will line up like this, and as you can see, they line up completely like that, vertically. So instead, what you want to do, you know, when you choose a side, or, you know, with these you can also do like 2 of these, by the way, or you could do, you know, like 2 over here, and you could do 1 over here. Like, it doesn't matter how you do that. You should look at more references, especially stuff like Tatsuki Fujimoto's one-shot, Look Back, is a good one to look at for stuff like this. I think the paneling, that's really good. That's a good one to look at. Also, you don't have to choose one of these sides either. Additionally, you could just do a line like this, but eventually, you know, you choose this side. But, you know, rarely, well, I wouldn't say rarely, but preferably going down the middle is, you know, unless you're trying to, you know, convey a certain feeling or something, I wouldn't see the purpose of doing the most boring thing that you could do. Like, if you're going to do it and make it interesting, right? So yeah. Now, since we're past that, I'll just go over something real quick, which is sort of, I guess, the purpose of panels, because depending on how you draw big and small panels, that's how long people are gonna spend looking at that panel. So to be more specific, if you draw super small panels like this, people are gonna spend super quick looking at these. They're just gonna skim over them. But if you do a double page spread, somebody's looking at it for a long time, like, or at least long enough to know what's, you know, going on there. Or if you do a big panel like this, another one like this, or a big panel like this, like, naturally people are always gonna sort of look at that for a longer time. So general idea is where you draw these big and small panels. The way I think about it, for how I draw my mangas, typically I'm thinking of build up and punchline. If something's a punchline, it's a bigger panel. If it's a build up, smaller panel. But things vary. Even though they're smaller panels, they should still be interesting. They shouldn't be something that looks too boring, like a headshot all the time, things like that. But we'll get on that later when I'm talking about composition and what you put inside the panels and things like that. But first and foremost, let's say we're doing like a normal scene here. Give me a sec. I think I'm gonna do this different. Since we're doing a build up, I'm gonna do it like this. So yeah, I chose a side. But nowadays it just comes kind of more naturally than having to think about it. As you study more manga, you'll figure out more about it. So we'll just do a quick scene here. So let's say somebody is walking down the street. He's a stickman. Beautiful stickman character, of course. He sees a cat. The cat is chilling. Look at this cat. Beautiful cat. The guy in the foreground. He can't see its face. So he goes to pet the cat. Because, who doesn't pet cats? And I guess what happens? Boom. Cat turns around. Cat faded ash. See, it's smoking a cigarette. But the general idea is, and then you do speed lines like this. And this would be the punchline. So all of these are set up. For example, he's walking down the street, he sees a cat, he's going to pet the cat, boom. The cat's actually smoking a cigarette and is faded AF. You can also do it here on a double page spread, which is preferable, to be honest, for the majority of things. You want people, when they read your book, they want to turn the page and see these things. Which is why technically, I guess, whatever will be happening on this page is, whatever. And then he'd start walking down the street here, and then the punchline will be on this page. Because they turn to the next page, and then this would be the punchline, essentially. If you know what I mean. So yeah, on this page, he'd be walking down the street, he'd see the cat would go around, and the cat would be faded ash here. And then, here we can show an expression of the character. Moving on, I hope you understood that. We're going to talk about, since I've pretty much covered everything I went to with paneling specifically, we'll talk about a few mistakes people make when putting sort of information inside of a panel. Typically what I say, if we're going to draw, the most basic paneling that I can think of, we'll do this, which is wrong, by the way, but we already know that. Not wrong, but it is boring. This is what they do typically. Beginners, anyway. They'll draw a lot of headshots. The majority of things will be headshots, actually. From what I've noticed, they don't really show much background. Usually it's a side view, or maybe every now and then a shot of a foot, which isn't necessarily wrong, but when all you show is headshots and feet shots, it's kind of boring for a reader. So what you want to do instead, not only do you want to vary the paneling, but you also want to vary the shots that you're putting inside of the panels. For example, bigger panels aren't just for reveals, by the way. Therefore, you can use them for establishing shots, you can use them for, expression shots, things like that. Even, sometimes I see them used to put a bunch of characters inside, but that's usually in comics rather than manga itself. So here, what I might show is an establishing shot of a classroom. So rather than showing, a character talking in this classroom, we'll show the classroom itself, an establishing shot, which is important for telling your readers where the characters are in the scene. Or where the characters are, in the scene, yeah. And we have a stick figure, yeah. We have him talking to someone, and stuff like that. So, while we're here, I might as well talk about also, bubbles, how we're gonna arrange the bubbles here. Essentially, you don't want to make the bubbles too complex or confusing to sort of read. since the bubbles are pretty much, one of the most important things, probably the most important thing. Even if your art's bad, your manga should still be readable and easy for people to pick up on. But if the art is good and the bubbles, they're not really readable, then it's a little difficult to even say if they like your manga or not. They can say they like the art, they won't say they like the manga. So when you're setting up your bubbles, what you want to do is typically people's eyes, they naturally go like this on the page. So this is how you want to kind of set up your bubbles. They don't have to they don't have to line up exactly on these lines, of course. For example, since this line goes directly here, you should put a bubble here, right? You could put it there, but you could also put it down here. Like, all that matters is that it's following the for me anyway, the general idea of sort of the reading orientation, right to left for manga, left to right for comics. But rather I'd put the character here, and maybe he could be, looking at a bubble or something like that. This is how Akira Toriyama does it in Dragonball. Often the characters will look at the bubbles, even if the bubbles are in sort of weird places. If a character's looking at the bubble, or the bubble is important in the scene, or it's really noticeable because of how, let's say this part was super dark down here, bubbles are just naturally white, so this is always going to draw attention because of the contrast here. I'll talk about that later because that's a little more confusing. But essentially, you could put the bubble down here for your, logically. You could put it down there, if you wanted to. Okay. You can put, so once you put the bubbles down in there, because the bubbles are the most important thing, you could also sort of put them down first, when you're starting the scene. I just drew this here because I was speeding through it. But another good thing to do with bubbles is, if you have a composition here, you can use the rule of thirds to put down your bubbles and important things. Essentially, if you don't know, the rule of thirds is, it's a grid like this. You have 3 across this way, and you have 3 down this way. And sort of impactful or important things will go inside of these 4 points where the lines intersect. So essentially, what I'm saying is that you could put a bubble over here, you could put a bubble down here, you put a bubble over here, and you could put a bubble over here. Essentially, there aren't really many scenarios where you would want the bubble in the center of the panel, or too far off to this side, or you could have it too far off, but typically they're always touching the rule of thirds. And this is a good way to get yourself used to drawing bubbles and drawing sort of composition in general, because what you could do here, you could draw a character, he's in the rule of thirds, as you can see, and then we could draw the bubble itself, it's also inside a rule of thirds. And you could do this in a bunch of ways too, like if your bubble's down here and you have 2 characters talking, you could put both of these characters in these bubbles, in these focal points, right? And that would be how you use these rule of thirds. And you could also use it here because this line is kind of like this. You could put a bubble here, as usual, as we just showed. We can just make the 2 people sit here. Naturally, we wouldn't really want to do that though, because that might be too similar to this panel here. Instead, in this scenario, what I want to do is show a face or something like that. There's no real rhyme or reason to the reason people, well, there is reasons for the way people use their angles, but if you're just drawing a basic scene, you don't really need a reason to draw certain angles. Essentially, for me, I'm just trying to make things as interesting as they can possibly be, even though it's a talking scene and things like that. So that's what I personally do. You have a side view here, the person talking, but usually when I use a view like this, I wouldn't usually have another character talking, another shot of a face talking, unless I had a reason to. It was, I need to see the character's expression when they talk. But let's say we had this here, we had the character down here, like so. Essentially, we just want to vary the shots as much as possible, vary the panels as much as possible. The only way you're going to get better at this is looking at more manga, seeing what angles they use, seeing what panels they use. The only way to get better at drawing manga is to study manga. It's the only way. Even if you're studying films, you're studying, all these other things, it doesn't matter because manga is different than any form of media out there. They use angles that are different than what a lot of places use. Even though they follow similar techniques, there are a lot of things, the pacing of the story, when they choose to put in the background, when they choose to leave a background out is different than everything. Specific creators will have their stuff targeted more to what a film does. For example, Naoki Urasawa, the guy who made Billy Bat and Monster, he uses a lot of stuff from TV. If you've seen the stuff, you know that the shots that he uses are very similar to what you might see in film. But that's a stylistic choice. Typically with normal mangas, it's going to be super exaggerated and have a lot of energy. And to convey that energy, you have to study it. You have to study the expressions they use. Now I'm just going to get into a few, things that are a little bit more complex or a little bit more difficult for a beginner if you're trying to make your stuff readable and also interesting. But these are more, essentially, let's say I was using this exact panel border that I had before this one. I do this. People think that you should only do this when, or beginners usually think that you should only do this if it's an important scene or something, which also isn't the case. But you can overlap characters sort of out of panels, like so. So a character could be standing outside of a border and it would bring attention to them. This doesn't necessarily always mean it has to be a breakout moment where the character is standing there, during a fight scene, like he's zooming fast, he's zooming real fast out of a panel. It doesn't have to be something like that. It could be something extremely simple. He's in a panel, he's standing there, he's talking. The character overlaps the panel. Why? You don't need a reason. The only reason you need is that it's interesting. That is the only reason. You could have a character overlap sort of a panel here. There's like a manga called Witch Hat. Let me spell it. Witch Hat. Yeah, I think this is how it's spelled. I think I'm wrong, but you can find it. And this uses a lot of overlap, and usually they don't even have reasons. They just do it. And this manga is, well known as like a manga that uses paneling really well. So you can just overlap basically anything. But the idea is, even if you overlap, especially when you overlap, you don't want your stuff to come across as complex to read or difficult to read. It still has to be simple to read and easy for people to glide across quickly, because people are reading manga super quick. They're not stopping and thinking about things unless they're an artist like, me or you, probably. They're not stopping there and thinking, oh wow, he had overlap, no. So it still has to be simple for people to read, so you have to plan these things out when you do them. Something else you can do is not draw a panel at all. For example, like so. We still put information and stuff in here, just like it was a normal panel, but the general idea is there is no border separating it like so. It's just its own panel. It's like the background of the page or something, and these ones would be overlaid onto the actual page itself, if that makes any sense. Okay, so you can put anything in here. You can put a close-up of a character's face. You can put an establishing shot, as we already know. You can put anything, just normal stuff. Yeah. But these, these can work pretty much anywhere. Typically, you don't really need to plan these out because all it will be doing is just deleting one of these panel borders and keeping whatever's inside anyway. Like, this doesn't really make anything more complex or anything like that. It should be simple to add. Chain Soldier does this. It's a manga. Overlapping sort of panels. So when it comes to beginners, I used to do this too, but when I was starting to do it, it was difficult and made things difficult to read. But you can actually overlap panels like so. A panel can overlap another panel just like how a character can, is what I'm saying basically. Like so. Let's say this is how Chain Soldier does it. As you can see here, one of the panels is overlapped. Let's say it's a fight scene. It doesn't have to be a fight scene either. It could be anything. That's what I mean. When you're drawing, to make things interesting, when you're drawing a romance or a character's talking, act like it's a fight scene. Make it interesting. Use interesting shots. Use interesting compositions. Varied. Make them as different as possible. Boom. You've made something interesting. It really is just that simple. Obviously, experience comes into play a lot. I've drawn a lot of pages, but, I'm still not that good. There's a reason I'm not published in this year. I just have the editor and everything there too, because I have a lot to learn too. And we could have, them holding the sword, or we could go close up to, their hand, holding the sword or whatever the clip they're holding here. I don't know what it is actually. Here it's a sword now, or is it? Now it's a sword. But you could do stuff like that. And these overlap panels, they can come in anywhere. But the general idea is you don't want them to affect how difficult the thing is to read. Something more sort of experimental. Some of that I was talking about earlier a little bit. If I'm drawing a, sort of, panel thing here, to draw attention to a speech bubble or to draw attention to a panel, we change the value of it. It's going to sound a little difficult, but essentially, if every single other panel is a certain way, for example, if there's a lot of white in these panels, this one, and this one, we can make this panel bigger, we can make this panel here bigger, and to stand out even more, we can make it a different contrast. For example, we can make it super dark, like black. But once we put the character in, it's like this. We put the character in the bubble, and we have him talking, or them talking with the bubble. I don't really know what's going on. Essentially, whatever you put in these panels up here, as long as it's not something black, this panel right here is always going to draw attention because it's so different than everything else there. I do this a lot with when I'm drawing sort of grayscale, or not grayscale, but like scenes where a character is doing some kind of expression. I put this down a lot. Not only will I draw a big panel, but also I'll make the character super gray, and it draws attention to them. And then down here, we put in some other random things. When you're doing these things, you really have to plan them out though, because they can easily, go wrong. And it's a little bit more difficult to control how it turns out if you don't have experience doing it. Even I have some trouble doing it too. But essentially, it doesn't just have to be for big shots like this too. We can use these for frickin' characters when they first show up. God dang it. We can actually use it. I think that's part of the reason why Danadan makes Okuran's costume, like the school uniform he wears, so dark, because it draws so much attention. In any scene, him having a darker sort of costume would make his whole thing, stand out. So if I made his character have a super dark, frickin', what does this have to do with paneling? It shows you how to draw attention to specific parts. Okay, I'm capping. I'm lying to myself. But this is what I'm saying. Like, come on now. This is interesting. Okay, I'm gonna calm down. But yeah, essentially you can draw attention to things like that. I don't really know if I have anything more to say. I think I've told you pretty much everything that I personally think about. If you're working with a script, it becomes difficult to use less panels, and you might have to use more panels or include two things into one sort of thing. This is why taking manga commissions is a little bit difficult, because if your writer doesn't let you sort of handle the pacing and things like that, and they only have a certain amount of budget for a specific amount of pages, it becomes difficult for you to sort of express the scenes in the way that they should be expressed. So what you have to do instead is, find ways to put two panels together and still make it work. Like if they have, guy digging out his nose with a booger, he has a booger in his nose, and he's also walking, and he's also eating a freaking bag of chips, it's going to be difficult to put all these things into one. So maybe it's not that specific panel that you want to, put together. Maybe it's the panel where the person's walking and they're talking at the same time on the phone. But you have to find a way to show that they're talking on the phone. Wait, give me a sec. You have to find a way to show that they're talking on a phone while walking in a certain background scene, essentially. One more quick thing to talk about before I go. I think pretty much I told you everything I want to know. Or you might know. When it comes to establishing shots, I know I said earlier, you can put it at the start of a thing to show where the characters are, but it doesn't necessarily have to be at the start of the thing. Typically with beginners, you should put it at the start of the thing, or you could, it makes it easier for you to keep track of things. But when you're sort of a more experienced artist, not a professional, because no professional is watching this realistically and made it this far, but instead of, wait, give me a second, that's not correct. We'll do it like this. You don't always need to show the background first. You could show a character's expression first, and then after that, you could actually show the background that they're in. I think I've talked about this before. But the establishing shot doesn't always have to come first, even though, typically it does come first. Traditionally, anyway. But as you start to get better, you find ways to make things more interesting and put things in different places and make them work still. Well, that's all. That's pretty much all I have to talk about. If you like the video, like, subscribe, type-ish. Peace.